bombshell new lawsuit that involves Sean Diddy Combs, but isn't against the disgraced music mogul. As Diddy is listening to closing arguments in his sex trafficking and racketeering trial in federal court in New York, his son, Justin, has been hit with a lawsuit by a woman who claims that he lured her to Los Angeles to be raped by multiple men, including his dad, Sean Diddy Combs.
The moment this story dropped, it felt like the ground cracked open underneath an entire empire. Because what's happening right now isn't just another headline, another scandal.
And on Thursday, finished their closing arguments in the case against the disgraced music mogul that we learned about this new lawsuit against Sean Combs' son, Justin. Justin is one of Diddy's 7 kids. Here he is with his dad's arm around his shoulder. Justin has been in court supporting his dad just as his siblings have been over the past 7 weeks of testimony. Now, listen, whatever your feelings are on Sean Combs and whether you think he's guilty of the charges that could put him in federal prison for the rest of his life, you just have to think how difficult it must be to hear about all the sexual exploits of their father. But if you believe the allegations I'm about to tell you in this new lawsuit brought against Justin Combs, Justin apparently was very aware of his dad's lifestyle. The new lawsuit that just dropped was filed by a woman from Louisiana who says in 2017, Justin Combs coaxed her to come to LA because she says that Diddy's son promised her a job in the entertainment industry. She claims the two had met on Snapchat, and Justin allegedly asked for explicit pictures, and she sent them. The woman, who's not named in this suit, says when she got to LA, she was raped by several men, including a certain music mogul now at the center of this high-profile, historic trial in federal court in Lower Manhattan. Yes, Sean Diddy Combs. The alleged victim claims that Justin invited her out west for a weekend to talk about her career. But when she got there, she says she was kept in a house in Beverly Hills. And according to the lawsuit, things seemed fine at first, but when she allegedly asked Justin Combs if they were going to leave the house, he said no. She claims that Justin Combs offered her alcohol, pills, and weed, and she thinks that the weed was laced. Now, you can see in those allegations some of the comparisons in this lawsuit to the so-called freak-offs that we have been hearing about for weeks at the center of the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial. The woman says after she took the drugs, 3 men entered the house and all of them were wearing masks. Now, it's unclear what kind of masks the men were wearing, but when I read that part, I thought about the testimony of Sheree Hayes in the Sean Diddy Combs trial, the escort known as the Punisher. He testified that during a freak-off, Sean Combs allegedly wore a face covering that he likened to a Muslim hijab. In the lawsuit against Justin Combs, the alleged victim says that she knew that one of the men was Diddy just because of his mannerisms, but how about this? She also knew it was Diddy because she says that Justin, as his dad entered the home to allegedly rape a woman that he brought to LA, called Diddy, quote, Pops. Now, we see on Justin's social media that Pops is the phrase that he often uses for his dad. In this lawsuit, the alleged victim claims that she was led to a bedroom where she was allegedly told, quote, you better let this happen or else. Then she says that each man took a turn raping her, calling it a, quote, brutal gang rape. After that, she was taken to an airport on Monday and flown home. Not only is Diddy facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison if convicted of all the charges in his sex trafficking and racketeering trial, there have been nearly 80 lawsuits filed against him in civil court. Many are still active. Several of the lawsuits accuse Diddy of sexual abuse and are filed by people who are not giving their names, just like in this lawsuit that we're talking about. This also isn't the first lawsuit that Justin Combs has recently faced. Justin was named in a suit brought by music producer Rodney Jones, who goes by Little Rod. Rod claims that Diddy coerced him into sexual acts, and you can see the suit also names Justin Combs and accused Justin of covering up a shooting in 2022 at Little Rod's studio in LA with his dad.
Another legal battle that fades in a week. This is different. This is the kind of situation that detonates everything at once: past decisions, hidden actions, buried history, all dragged into the light by a massive new lawsuit that doesn't just target one powerful figure, but his entire bloodline right alongside him. And the way the allegations are stacking up, it's looking like the biggest legal nightmare this family has ever faced. The empire built by the man at the center of all this, once untouchable, once worshipped like a king, now suddenly looks like a fragile tower held together by duct tape and egos. One filing, one lawsuit, one set of disturbing claims. That's all it took to send the entire structure shaking. And the wildest part? Nobody saw it coming. Not like this. Sure, people assumed controversy would hit at some point. When you build a career on power, money, and control, you're always one misstep away from chaos. But no one expected the accusations to spread this wide.
In May, a judge did dismiss Justin from Little Rod's lawsuit, so he is no longer facing those allegations. As for the lawsuit filed in the hours before his dad's attorneys were to make closing arguments, E! News reports that Diddy's attorneys have denied the allegations, but it's unclear what Justin's response is at the time of this recording. Joining us now is criminal defense attorney Will Corman. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us. What stands out to you in this lawsuit that Sean Combs is named, but also his son Justin?
Well, it's interesting. I think the connection to Sean Combs is pretty tenuous. We've gone through this all. It almost seems the one connection to Sean Combs that they actually put on him is the allegation that Justin called one of the masked men Pops during the course of the assault or just before the assault. That's it. The other connection, obviously, is that Sean Combs is Justin Combs' dad. So I think it's a bit of a stretch. Again, we're just receiving these documents now. We're just going through this lawsuit now. Perhaps there's more out there, but it really doesn't seem that way.
And of course, people who are victims of sexual violence, you want them to get their justice. We have seen dozens of lawsuits filed against Justin's dad in the wake of when he was indicted for the trial that he's on right now. How do you go through these lawsuits and understand who's telling the truth and who actually has a case that could be heard in court? Someone like Cassie Ventura, when you see that video from 2016, or you do look at some of these Jane Doe lawsuits and you wonder how many of them are true.
Look, as a criminal defense attorney, it's my job to be cynical, and it's my job to, review everything with a pretty jaundiced eye. So the question really becomes are there corroborating facts and circumstances from Jump Street that make sense? So for example, if this lawsuit is alleging that something happened in LA during a specific period of time, do we know that Sean Combs was there? Do we actually know that he was present in LA? These things aren't difficult to find out, but it's those baby steps to trying to build the foundation of a lawsuit to see what's realistic that really matter in a case like this. And as you so correctly said, we want victims of domestic violence, of sexual violence, and so on and so forth to actually be compensated accordingly. Unfortunately, when we have circumstances where we have somebody famous who's been charged with crimes, we have somebody famous who's been sued, there can be instances where other folks jump on the bandwagon. And I'm not suggesting that's what's happening here, but it is something that everyone needs to look at skeptically.
Right, absolutely. If you were to bring a lawsuit against someone like Justin Combs, or any of these, and even the cases involving his dad, and you're bringing a civil suit, what facts do you need to have? I mean, certainly if you have a victim who says that this happened and they're ready to, they're able to provide some corroborating evidence that something happened, what do you actually need to be able to go to the courthouse and say, I'm filing a lawsuit against this person?
I think that you need to have somebody who's willing to state under oath that this is what happened to me, that this is what I'm alleging, these are my damages, this is how it's impacted me. And as an attorney, again, I would want to make sure, especially in a lawsuit like this, where it involves a high-profile person, but quite frankly, in any lawsuit, that there is some corroborating information out there so that my lawsuit isn't tossed out of court pretty quickly.
And reading through this complaint, it mentions several other lawsuits. You have the lawsuit from Rodney Jones, who's known as Little Rod, and Sean Combs is facing that lawsuit, and his son was named in it, but has since been
to drag multiple people connected by blood into the same legal firestorm, all accused of playing roles in a system that now looks darker, messier, and more disturbing than anything the public had pieced together before. It begins with a set of plaintiffs who came forward with stories that sound like something ripped from the shadows. They didn't just call out one person, they pointed fingers at the entire circle around him, including the ones the world had only ever seen as the next generation, the sons who grew up inside the empire, the ones portrayed as the new heirs of power, the ones always photographed smiling on carpets, in clubs, in private jets, now suddenly named as players in a world the public wasn't supposed to know existed. And that's what has the whole internet spinning, because the lawsuit doesn't just describe one incident. It paints a pattern, a culture, a lifestyle built on control, manipulation, intimidation, and exploitation. A system where power wasn't just used, it was weaponized. A system where lines weren't just crossed, they were erased completely. The man at the center
dropped. What do you make about it having all these other different cases and elements brought in? What is the attorney here trying to prove?
Well, it almost appears as if the attorney is saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. So here are all these other lawsuits, and I've reviewed the complaint, and they talk about them in some detail. They don't just list them. They say, this happened on this date, and this person sued Sean Combs here, and this person sued Sean Combs here for this set of facts and circumstances. And they're essentially trying to say, because there's all these other lawsuits, you should give this one a stamp of approval, because again, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Tony Busby, his law firm is bringing this. He has been in the civil world a very, very prominent name. For those who don't know him, and you work in criminal defense, what do you know about Tony Busby? Knowing that it's his law firm bringing this, what does that tell you?
I don't think that the Busby law firm is taking these allegations lightly. I believe they have the resources to do their own investigations prior to actually filing these suits. So this isn't some, sole practitioner who's trying to jump on the cottage industry that's been created around suing Sean Combs. I think that they have the ability to investigate this. They have the ability to decide whether or not they want to take on these cases. And I think that does lend some credibility, albeit, not a ton, but I think it does lend some credibility to the facts and circumstances surrounding it. In other words, this alleged victim didn't just walk in off the street to some random law firm who then is saying, oh, we now have the ability to sue Sean Combs. This is someone who's been down this well-trod path before and probably knows exactly what the pitfalls are in suing somebody as prominent as Sean Combs.
This lawsuit came down at the time we were recording this, came down last night. So that was a couple hours after the government finished their closing arguments against Sean Combs. And as we're recording this right now, Sean Combs, his defense team is giving his closing argument. What do you make about the timing of this? It's against Justin Combs and Sean Combs' name, but it's happening right in the middle of maybe the most pivotal part of this entire trial.
I don't exactly know what to make of the timing of it. I think it's interesting. I think that I'm a little surprised that it's come out so late, but sometimes we don't know what led the alleged victim in this lawsuit to break their silence and to file this lawsuit. Perhaps they were watching the testimony or reviewing the testimony in the criminal case and said, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened to me. Perhaps they said, they listened to the testimony and they said, there are so many victims here. I believe that I am one too. We don't know what prompted it. I think the timing is interesting, but I don't know that I can make anything of it as we sit here right now.
I think of recently you had Tyler Perry, prominent name in Hollywood, very different case, but accused of sexual violence and sexual harassment, workplace harassment with an actor who had worked on one of his shows, and the actor provided text messages in the complaint. This doesn't have that. Very different case. But the fact that there's not that visual evidence that we can look at, and I don't know what type of visual evidence would exist in a case like this, but the fact that we don't particularly have those, does that take away from the weight of what this lawsuit may actually be in the end when it comes to the truth?
Well, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here because
Sure.
The filing of a complaint is just simply the first step. And all the complaint needs to do, on paper anyway,
of it all, once admired for ambition, for his rise, for his influence, now stands accused of orchestrating environments that were anything but glamorous. And the sons? They're not just bystanders anymore. They're listed, labeled, tied into claims that, if true, could destroy their futures before they even fully started. And don't forget, the public loves a downfall. They love watching someone who once strutted like a god come crashing down to earth, gasping for control, scrambling for explanations, drowning in allegations. But what's happening here isn't just a fall, it's a free fall with no bottom in sight. Because the more this case evolves, the more ugly details emerge. Every update feels like another punch to the chest of this entire empire. behind closed doors. Insiders say the panic is real, not the fake kind where rich people tweet inspirational quotes and pretend everything is fine. No, this is the type of panic where phones are being smashed. Meetings are happening at 3 a.m., lawyers are being called like paramedics, and everyone in that inner circle is trying
to set forth the factual allegations that are enough to sort of not get the case thrown out at the first few stages. And that bar is pretty low. So there may be tons of evidence surrounding these allegations that aren't in the lawsuit. They don't need to be in the lawsuit. Again, there needs to be just enough to get us through those first few steps. Excuse me.
As Sean Combs, we're awaiting, once the jury gets the case next week, and then we'll see what the verdict is. But guilty or not guilty, he's going to be dealing with a lot of civil cases that are still pending. What does the timeline look like for Sean Combs? Let's just say he's found not guilty of everything. What does the legal timeline look for him? How long could he be dealing with the issues related to all these civil suits?
That's a great question. First of all, I don't think he's going to be found not guilty of everything. So that's a separate issue entirely.
Yeah.
Having said that, again, different jurisdictions have different statutes of limitations for sex assault victims to bring lawsuits within which, or timelines within which they can bring the lawsuits. And so again, depending on where allegations come from, those statutes of limitations can be very long. It also matters on how old the alleged victim was at the time that the incident took place. For example, there have been a number of states which have extended statutes of limitations for minors who were sexually assaulted. Those statutes of limitations are much longer than for adults who've been sexually assaulted. So it really does depend. And I know that's not quite answering the question, but I suppose the easiest answer is it could go on for quite some time.
And you look at this complaint, the complaint is for sexual assault and battery, gender violence, negligent supervision. I think a lot of people would look at this and they'd certainly, if all of this is true, what a horrific experience that this victim went through. Why is this not a criminal case?
That's a great question. And I suppose that this victim could have brought this to the county attorney's office or whatever local prosecutorial body there are. We don't know the answer to that. Perhaps quite frankly, we simply don't know the answer to that. But it's also important to remember this, that Sean Combs is named in this lawsuit. I have reviewed this lawsuit. The connection to Sean Combs is pretty thin from a legal standpoint. It just is. So we don't know why this wasn't brought forth criminally. Perhaps the person decided they would rather seek their own form of justice from a civil standpoint. Sean Combs has a lot going on criminally right now, and perhaps it wouldn't even be prosecuted. Again, if he's found guilty of all these offenses in federal court in New York, Sean Combs is going to prison for decades. He's 55 years old. Not that old, but he's still going to prison for a very long time. So I don't know that the LA District Attorney's Office or whatever prosecutorial body is out there would bother pursuing criminal charges if Sean Combs at age 55 just gets a 30-year sentence federal.
And for Justin Combs, and I assume he'll have, I don't know if he has a trust or an inheritance or how he financially makes a living. Certainly it's part of being in the circle of Sean Combs. How does he pay for an attorney? Is that have to come from it? Because I think if Sean Combs is found guilty and all this money, and he's got a lot, but we don't know how much money Sean Combs has, frankly, but we know that it's going to a lot of these cases. How does Justin Combs defend himself? Does this get wrapped into, if his dad's going to have to defend against this, is it a 2-for-1 when it comes from the defense side?
It could be. We certainly don't know what the corporate structure is of Bad Boy Records and all the other entities that are named as defendants in this lawsuit.
To figure out who's going to flip first, who's going to expose what, and who's going to end up taking the fall. And trust me, someone always takes the fall. But let's talk about the lawsuit itself. The wording isn't soft, it isn't vague. It comes with accusations that would make anyone's jaw drop, claims involving coercion, manipulation, environments that pushed boundaries beyond anything ethical, moral, or legal. And the most disturbing part? The plaintiffs say this behavior wasn't occasional. It was routine, systematic, normalized in that world. The Sons are being accused of participating in or enabling situations that no one expected them to be involved in. The public image of the smiling, Camera-ready heirs is now clashing violently with claims describing conduct that sounds predatory, reckless, and calculated, and whether or not every detail is true, the damage is already spreading like wildfire. Because once a claim like this hits the internet, it never fully
plaintiff in a civil lawsuit himself, but whenever you are a plaintiff in a civil case, you obviously want to go after someone with the ability to pay. That's what we call a deep pocket. So even though Diddy might not have personally participated in this alleged incident, you really want to wrap him in as a co-defendant, because obviously his ability to pay any judgment is going to be very different than Christian or Justin or any of the other of the 7 children.
Do you think that Grace O'Marquez, the plaintiff in this yacht criminal or civil lawsuit rather, do you think that the feds would reach out to her and ask her about her experience perhaps?
I do, and this is why. Apparently, and obviously I haven't heard them, she has recordings of this incident, audio recordings, and we know how powerful video evidence is. We've talked about it with Cassie Ventura and how that really maybe even shift the direction of this case entirely, because of course Combs denied everything until CNN got a hold of that video in May. And we're talking about a lawsuit that was filed in April, I believe. And again, I don't know if it's true, but the allegations are that much of this was recorded and there's audio recordings. And if so, and she's saying no, and Christian is moving forward anyway, then you have attempted sexual assault.
Talking about audio and video recordings, that's what's huge in this case. I mean, we heard a lot about it from Cassie in her lawsuit, then of course Lil Rod, and now confirmed in the federal indictment that the feds are saying, yep, we've got some, and that's what led to this indictment and his charges. But what's interesting is that in Lil Rod's lawsuit, he actually has photos, like screenshots of a recording of Justin Combs, and he says it's allegedly with a sex worker. Do you think that part is incriminating too, that the feds may be looking at that recording?
I do. And during Combs' initial appearance before the new judge, Subramanian, there was some discussion of this, and Christian and Justin were in court as well, supporting their father. But the feds were talking about the 96 different electronic devices they seized and the terabytes and terabytes of data. Now, some of it might not be relevant, but some of it may be very much on point, because going back to Cassie's original allegation, Combs reportedly recorded many of these sex acts. It might have been for his sexual pleasure. It might have been to maintain control over their participants. But whether it's a voluntary recording, whether it's a hotel security camera, whether it's something that Lil Rod, took in a still video or a recording, or whether it's something that a civil plaintiff, a victim of sexual assault, I try not to name them, even though she did out herself in the complaint, took without the knowledge of Christian or others. It's all very, very powerful, because oftentimes when you're dealing with sexual assault and sexual abuse, these are things that happen behind closed doors, right? Could be at a home, could be at a hotel. In this case, could be on a yacht. And usually there aren't a whole lot of witnesses to it. So you will have a he said, she said type situation in many, many cases. Well, a recording can really change that narrative, because again, it can really corroborate the story of one side or the other.
In regards to Justin specifically and these alleged recordings, audio, all of that, so that's in relation to Lil Rod's lawsuit. He's actually a co-defendant listed quite a few times throughout this. And in addition to him sitting next to this alleged prostitute, we have that photo. There's also allegations that he actually partook in these freak-offs and potentially drugged women. This is something Lil Rod is saying. How would the feds go about proving something like that? I know that's the pattern we've seen across a lot of these civil suits, that women allege Diddy, for instance, drugged them. But now Lil Rod's also pointing the finger at Justin Combs, saying he drugged some of these women. How would the feds then
appears ever? The Empire's legal team is scrambling hard, denials, counterstatements, planned rebuttals, emergency PR calls, but even insiders admit that this isn't something you can clean up with one press release. This isn't a spilled drink you can wipe off the floor. This is a flood. People close to the family say the man at the center of everything is spiraling. Not publicly, you won't see that part, but behind the scenes, he's reportedly furious, terrified, and trying to figure out how everything spiraled out of control so fast. And the sons? They're stuck in the crossfire. They don't have the decades of power their father does. They don't have the fortress of connections. They don't have the immunity that comes with age and influence. They're young enough that this could stain them forever, and they know it. The disturbing claims in the lawsuit describe scenes and situations that people in that world had whispered about for years, but never confirmed out loud. And now that the lawsuit has forced these whispers into the open, you can feel the shockwaves ripping through the industry.
And go to look further into that.
Yeah, Lil Rod's lawsuit is interesting in that there are many defendants. We talked about Christina Horam, right? Some of the allegations that came out in Lil Rod's lawsuit was Christina, of course, being Combs' right-hand woman. She allegedly had the fanny pack with the drugs that were provided to the sex workers, or that there are the allegations directly against Justin as well. So whenever you're proving something like this, obviously, you're going to rely on the testimony of witnesses. It could be independent witness, because the sex workers, even though they're participants in a sex act, they won't necessarily be charged, or I don't think they're going to be defendants in the lawsuit if the allegation is that they were forced to perform these sex acts and it wasn't just a commercial transaction. So you can rely on that testimony. Obviously, Lil Rod himself, but he's a plaintiff, so his testimony may be biased, may be true, but it's certainly something that you would want more of if you are a prosecutor. And then you look to video and you look to other types of evidence, maybe text messages, something that corroborates what Lil Rod has said. And of course, if you have someone like Horam who flips, that would be very, very helpful for prosecutors, because we know that former employees, they usually have a lot of information and they can be leveraged in a criminal case or even a civil one to cooperate to save themselves.
I want to talk more about that, the flipping of all of this, because right now Diddy is the only one who has been charged federally in relation to this scheme, this alleged scheme. But as you pointed out, there are other people who have been identified as participants in all this. Christina Coram obviously is the main one, along with the Combs enterprise or empire, whatever you want to call it. She has not yet been charged, but I'm pretty sure, as you've told me in the past, probably this interview and many others, the feds are going to be talking to Christina Coram, and it would be in her best interest likely to cooperate with them. But what about Justin and Christian? I mean, they're so close to Diddy. They're his sons, and they have accusations against them. They could, as you said, face these charges in the future. What do you think? Do you think that they would flip?
I think it's a lot less likely that Justin and Christian would flip. I've seen children testify against their parents. We've seen it on Law and Crime many times, and obviously it makes for great drama and courtroom theatrics. But I think in a case like this, it's going to be less likely. They really owe everything to their father, right? He's obviously someone with significant financial means. He's someone that's going to pay for their lawyers and protect them. I think it would be pretty surprising to see a flip like that. Of course, anything's possible, but I think it's less likely, given that there are people that really don't have that familial tie. They don't have their legacy. They don't have potentially hundreds of millions of dollars to lose if they end up turning sideways on their parents. So it's obviously a possibility. I think it's highly unlikely, especially what we saw during that first hearing. The children all being in court, directly supporting Combs, him waving and blowing kisses to them. I think a flip is unlikely with respect to Justin and Christian.
Yeah, what do you make of that? Obviously, they're supporting their father, as you've discussed. They were actually in the courtroom supporting him, as you said, blowing kisses, all of that. But then there's also headlines, photos, videos of Christian Combs, who's been out partying after all this. People are obviously clamoring at any sort of Diddy news. But do these two have to kind of keep in mind that the focus is going to be on them? They are being watched, I mean, in relation to what their dad was doing, but also their allegations against them. I mean, is this something they should be keeping in mind, their public image?
Other insiders and former associates suddenly going quiet. Old friends choosing distance. Collaborators pulling away. Brands scrubbing content. Because nobody wants to be standing next to a collapsing empire when it hits the ground. And make no mistake, that collapse feels closer than ever. The most chilling part of this whole situation isn't even the lawsuit itself. It's what the lawsuit could unleash. Because once one person steps forward, others feel brave enough to follow. More claims, more stories, more disturbing details, and every new voice makes the defense weaker. It becomes harder to deny, harder to spin, harder to bury. And that's exactly what's happening. Since this lawsuit hit, more individuals have been reaching out to investigators, legal teams, reporters, saying they have information, saying they saw things, saying they experienced things, saying they were involved in ways they were too afraid to admit before. What began as a single explosion is quickly turning into a...
I do, Sierra, and it's not just about the courtroom. We've talked about the court of public opinion in a case like this, and the jurors are ordinary people, and everyone knows who Sean Diddy Combs is. And if there's this sort of very high-profile criminal trial happening in May or sometime in 2025, and the perception is that the family doesn't take this seriously. They're partying, they're drinking. It really plays into some of the allegations that this was just a party lifestyle, and these individuals thought that they were above the law. Now, again, I'm not saying that jurors don't follow the instructions in the law, and they're really supposed to decide the case solely based on the facts and evidence in the case. But we've seen it time and time again. It could be Johnny Depp, it could be Michael Jackson. Whenever you have someone who's high profile, and the narrative, the public perception, the PR really machine goes in one way, it can really help shape the opinions in the courtroom as well.
So we've talked about these sexual assault allegations that are against both Justin and Christian, but there's another incident that's pointed out in Lil Rod's civil suit, and this is in regards to Justin. I just want to touch on this one quick, that apparently there was a shooting at one of Diddy's recording studios years ago, and that Justin and Diddy apparently covered this up. Somebody was obviously shot and injured in this incident. There were reports on it, but not in relation to either of those two. Is this something that the feds would pursue? I mean, I know that the main part of the case is these sexual assault allegations, but could they head down that road toward attempted murder with a gunshot wound?
Potentially, and I've gotten this question a lot with respect to, obviously, the killing of Tupac, both in 1996 and the attempted murder in 1994. And a lot of people, I'm sure, watching believe that Combs, had something to do with that. I think it's challenging because then you start going in a very different direction, a rabbit hole. You're charging something that may be more difficult to prove, involving a shooting. You don't necessarily have the victim who's there testifying. And, what I've seen from U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, and not just this case, and others as well, for instance, how he's handling the New York Mayor Eric Adams case, he is really keeping the surgical, he's keeping the charges narrow. That's why we're not seeing a kitchen sink approach. And sometimes we see that from prosecutors. For instance, in the Young Thug YSL case, everyone is being charged, right? Lots of different defendants, lots of different charges going, spanning over years. I don't think that's something that we're going to see here. I can't see that this prosecutor is going to charge things that aren't very easy to prove. Because of that, then you start creating potential doubt, even though these are very serious allegations, obviously murder, attempted murder. We're talking about Tupac probably being the greatest rapper of our lifetime. I don't think this is something that we're going to see added to the charges in this case, because I think this specific prosecutor wants to keep things very narrow and very surgical.
So unclear about all this, whether any charges, if and when, they could be added. But if we're talking about the defense now, switching to their side of things, I'm sure obviously they're talking to Diddy, but I'm wondering about their conversations with Christian and Justin. Do you think that the defense attorneys, their team, would be reaching out to both of them to talk and kind of bulk up Diddy's side of the case?
Sure. I'm sure that anyone who's a witness, whether it's a family member or someone else who was there, really needs a lawyer, because they may get subpoenaed. They may have to test
wildfire that nobody can control. Inside the mansion, yes. The same mansion once celebrated in music videos and paparazzi tours. Sources say the mood is grim. The hallways feel different. The security protocols have changed. Visitors are being restricted. Trusted employees are being replaced. And the sons, once living like royalty, are barely leaving their rooms, scrolling through their phones, seeing their names in headlines they never imagined they'd be tied to. The father, though, he's pacing, planning, panicking, because he knows this lawsuit isn't just a legal problem, it's a legacy problem. And legacies don't survive accusations like these without taking catastrophic hits. But the public is feasting on this. Social media is tearing the entire family apart, calling them out, demanding accountability, digging through old footage looking for clues that were missed, pointing out warning signs that everyone ignored when money and fame blinded them. Some are saying the empire was always built on toxic foundations. The sons, whether guilty or innocent, now face the weight of association with claims most people don't recover from. And the father? He's watching everything he built crumble piece by piece, knowing that this time, the fallout might be too big, too loud, and too public to escape. As new updates drop, the picture gets darker, the claims get uglier, the witnesses get bolder, the industry gets quieter. Everyone's waiting to see whether this empire can survive the biggest legal nightmare it has ever faced, or whether this lawsuit will go down as the moment that ended it all. More updates are coming, more shockwaves, more fallout. And trust me, this story isn't slowing down, it's only getting started.